It's a damn shame, Detective Johnson murmured, his eyes scanning the room. The suburban living room was chaotic. An overturned couch, a shattered television lodged in the wall, and blood splattered across the floor and dripping from the ceiling. The air was heavy, with a metallic scent of blood and the faint lingering odor of gunpowder. An officer, with a concerned expression, approached and handed him a crumpled piece of paper. Johnson's eyes narrowed as he read, the lines on his face deepening. You piece of shit, Morgan. It's been over 6 months since your last check. I can't manage alone. Your son is unruly and disrespectful. I'm working double shifts at 2 jobs, barely finding time to feed him, let alone care for him. If I don't get a check this week, I'll consult my lawyer. I've tried to work with you, but I'm at my limit. You choose the easy way or the court way. Just send the check. Johnson's jaw clenched as he lowered the paper. Find out who this Morgan guy is. Bring him in, he ordered, his voice tinged with frustration. His gaze settled on the headless body of the note's author, a woman lying in a grotesque, unnatural position. Her chest was a mangled mess from a close-range shotgun blast, her lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. In a stark, sterile room elsewhere, a boy, Thomas, sat on a stretcher. His legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glow on his bruised face. Beside him stood a middle-aged woman, her sleek hair pulled back in a neat bun, concern etched on her features. Who bruised you, Thomas? She asked, her voice a soothing contrast to the harshness of the room. Nobody, Thomas snapped, clutching his arm. His voice was laced with defiance, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. He growled lowly at the doctor, his gaze darting around the room, avoiding direct eye contact. Dark circles of exhaustion ringed his eyes, and his shirt, torn at the collar, hinted at a violent encounter. The doctor stood abruptly, her eyes widening slightly in realization. I'll be just a moment, Thomas. She turned away, hiding her concern. Thomas rolled his eyes, a smirk playing on his lips as he watched her leave. Detective Johnson, I'm not sure it's appropriate to question him now, the doctor said, her voice low but firm as she approached Johnson, who was leaning against the hallway wall, his arms crossed. Johnson shook his head, his expression resolute. It's not like that. I just need to know if he recognizes the perpetrator. He's very withdrawn. I'd be surprised if he opens up, but if he asks you to leave, I'll be out the door before he finishes the sentence. I need to locate his father anyway, Johnson replied, his tone indicating his urgency. The doctor hesitated at the door, then slowly pushed it open. Thomas, there's a detective here to see you. He has some questions. Is that okay? I hate police, but sure, I'd be glad to, Thomas sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Johnson entered the dimly lit room, reaching for the light switch. No, keep it dark, Thomas insisted, his voice suddenly cold. Johnson withdrew his hand, the shadows in the room deepening. The only light came from a cartoon playing on a TV in the corner, casting changing colors across Thomas's face. Johnson pulled up a chair and sat backward on it, draping his arms over the backrest, facing the hospital bed. His posture was casual, but his eyes were sharp, observant. What's your name, kid? Thomas, he replied, his tone now softer, almost vulnerable. Thomas, huh? I had a partner named Thomas. Tell me about your dad. My daddy is good. He spends time with me, but Mommy gets mad. He's not around much since he had to leave. Mommy said he did bad things. Bad things, like what? He stabbed our dog, or so Mommy thought, Thomas said, a disturbing hint of amusement in his voice. What's funny about that? Well, I never liked that dog. I let my friend play with it. By play, I mean. Who's your friend, Thomas? He looked down, avoiding the detective's gaze. I shouldn't talk about him. Mommy said I'm too old for imaginary friends. Was it your friend who hurt the dog, or you? It was him. He doesn't like you, Thomas murmured, his voice a mix of defiance and something unidentifiable. Do you know who hurt your mom? Detective Johnson asked, leaning forward slightly, his tone gentle yet probing. We did, Thomas said, his voice taking on a chilling flat tone. He stared at a spot on the wall, his eyes empty. Who's we, Thomas? In a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him, he answered, Does it matter? A disturbing grin spread across his face, transforming his youthful features into something more sinister. Johnson sat back, a chill running down his spine. The room, with its flickering cartoon lights, suddenly felt colder, more oppressive. He studied Thomas, trying to discern the truth behind his words, the reality behind his chilling confession. The detective's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the tragic scene. The violence in the living room, the desperate note, the boy's bruised body, and dark, haunting eyes. The puzzle was complex, the pieces not quite fitting together yet, but Johnson knew he was on the brink of uncovering a horrifying truth. As the cartoon on the TV cast eerie shadows across the room, Detective Johnson realized that this case was far from ordinary, and the boy before him held secrets darker than the room they were in.